Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about the Vancouver Canucks today. Vancouver, of course, a topic of conversation around the NHL, but I don't want to talk about this from a gossipy standpoint. I want to get into where things have gone wrong for the team, and maybe all the noise around the team is part of it. But I want to talk about this and just go through all of their results from December 1st until now. Go through what the players are doing over that time period as well, and we can talk about it. So it starts with them playing against Detroit. This was, I think it was December the 1st, actually. 5-4 overtime win for Vancouver over Detroit. They led 1-0 after the first. They led 3-2 after the second. It's, of course, tied 4-4 after the third. They win it in overtime, and they also trailed 4-3. So there's a comeback win for Vancouver, and there you go. Of course, Detroit fired their coach soon after that because you can't have that kind of crap. The Minnesota Wild then beat Vancouver, but this was a road trip. It was a long road trip, and it was relatively successful. So in that one, Vancouver led 1-0 after one. They led 2-1 after two, and of course it's tied 2-2, and then Minnesota wins in overtime. But it's Minnesota, one of the top teams in the league, playing very well. So at least they get a point. We'll come back to that. Then they come home. They play against Columbus, a 5-2 win. They were down 2-0 after the first, and then it's tied 2-2 in the second, and then they get the lead and they pull away. So 5-2 win for them there. Crisis averted. Then against Tampa Bay, they lose that one 4-2. They led 1-0 after one. They trailed 2-1 after the second. They lose that one 4-2, but it's Tampa. So it's not anything to get overly concerned with. They're 2-1-1 in the games on this board at this point. Should be fine. Then against St. Louis, they trailed 2-1 after one, 3-2 after two. They tied the game at 3. They lost 4-3 in overtime, but at least they got a point. Then they played Florida, and what a ridiculous game this was. They win this one 4-0. They were up 2-0 after one, 3-0 after two. I think it's the best game Vancouver's played all season. Absolutely remarkable. Just a ridiculous game, and quite the game indeed. But then they followed it up with arguably the worst game they've played all season against Boston and in Vancouver. So, yeah. Down 2-0 after one, 4-0 after two. They lose that game 5-1. It's an ugly one for Vancouver. But then they bounced back. They won 3-1 against Colorado. They were up 1-0 after one, 2-0 after two, and they win it 3-1. So they had wins against Florida and Colorado, which kind of offset what happened against Boston. And so to this point of the board, there's not really a lot of concern, just some. The inconsistency being a concern. And if you want to make comments about the coaching, inconsistency, that's something that you might be able to point to a coach and say, so the way things have been going lately, what are your plans to fix this? And what happens next is this is where things, for me personally, this is where things start to fall apart. So against Utah, they lose that one 3-2 in overtime. Scoreless after one, they led 1-0 after two. Scorey third period, and then they lose that one in overtime 3-2. But at least they get a point, right? And then next up, they get Vegas. They lose that one 3-1. They led 1-0 after one. It's tied 1-1 after two. But if you're playing Vegas and it's tied entering the third period, well, you tried. Vegas in the third period just doesn't lose games. Then against Ottawa, they lose this one 5-4 in overtime. It was 2-2 after one. Vancouver trailed 4-3 after two. They would tie it in the third and lose in the overtime, but at least they got a point. Then against San Jose, it was 1-1 after one. It was 4-1 for Vancouver after two, and I thought, good, they finally got a game where they don't have any tension, and they don't. Yeah, they won it 4-3, so it was a bit of a nail biter at the end. Probably shouldn't have been. So that's one of those ones where they get the win, but I'm like, I can't move them up the power rankings board for that win. That's one of those times where I look at the power rankings board and I'm like, I can't, because they didn't play particularly well in that one in terms of closing it out. Then the rage-inducing game, right, against Seattle. Vancouver led 1-0 after one, 3-1 after two. They led 4-1 in the third period with about 5 minutes left, and then they just stopped. And Seattle wins it in overtime 5-4. I'd still like to apologize to my neighbors for the language that came out of this house. No idea what the source of that was. Then against Calgary, they lose 3-1. Not optimal. Calgary's a team that they're fighting for that same playoff spot with. They were trailed 1-0 both after the first and after the second. They lose the game 3-1. Then against Seattle, more rage inducement. 1-1 after one. Vancouver led 2-1 after two, and they led 3-1 in the third. Did I have any faith they'd close it out? No. So 3-3 tie. They do win it in a shootout though, 4-3. So good on them. But then they play against Nashville at home and they lose 3-0. It was scoreless after one. They were down 1-0 after two. And interestingly enough, after this game, um, I remember talking to my wife Yvonne about how the game went, and talking about Max Sasson, who's over here, and saying that I thought he was probably Vancouver's best forward in that game, which is praise for Sasson, but it also says something about your team when your best player, when the forwards you look at and you go, he tried the hardest and he had the best game, is not one of your top six. And so it's praise, but it's kind of damning praise at the same time. Then against Montreal, 5-4 overtime loss. At least they get a point. 1-1 tie after one. They led 3-2 after two, but they fall apart in the third. They led 4-3, couldn't hold the lead, and in overtime they lost 5-4. Then last night they're down 0-1 after the first. They tied at 1-1 after a great second period. Score stays that way until the overtime, where a turnover leads to a goal. 2-1 win for Washington, but at least they get a point. So in their last 8 games, they've had four overtime overtime lost points. They haven't lost in a shootout, so there's that. They're 1-0 in shootouts over this time. So looking at the players over this time period, Quinn Hughes has missed some of the games. 14 games played, 3 goals, 17 assists, 20 points. 4 games missed, not bad, considering at the time the injury happened, he was seen as being probably out 2 weeks and might be more. And so Hughes being back is huge. DeBrusk, 18 games, 10 goals, 4 assists, 14 points. The tricky thing is, DeBrusk, he's hot now, but he's a hot and cold scorer, so it's going to cool off. He's going to have, 5 or 10 games without a goal. They're going to need somebody else who's going to be productive regularly, and that's where it gets kind of sticky. Now, Besser can be 18 games, 8 goals, 5 assists, 13 points. He's scoring well enough. Not at the same rate as last year, so that's going to be interesting because his contract's up this summer, and maybe this is the time where we see Besser end up being moved at the deadline. No idea. I would think that if the Vancouver Canucks can't sign him, they probably move his rights. It's just a matter of whether they do it in season. Do you do it before the draft just to trade his rights? You don't get nearly as much back, of course, if you wait that late to trade a player's rights, but Besser's one to keep an eye on. JT Miller's played 13 games, 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points. He's been productive. Outside of all of the noise, Miller has been a good player on the ice. And Pettersson, 12 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points. I think he gets over-criticized. I do. I think Pettersson gets over-criticized. When he was playing well earlier this season, there were PD chants all over, and everybody seemed to be like, okay, Pettersson's back, and now he started to struggle, and, well, he's out with injury right now, but prior to that, he was starting to struggle again, and it goes right back to all of the harsh criticism of Pettersson, which, the guy's still up near a point per game in the 12 games played on this board, so if that's the worst he's going to be, once he gets things going again, you're fine. Garland, 18 games, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points, one of the hardest working Canucks I've ever seen. Absolutely. Easily one of the hardest working Canucks I've ever seen. Sherwood, 18 games, 6 goals, 2 assists, 8 points. Sherwood is an extremely hard-working forward as well who hits everything that moves, has pretty good hands, and he's got some snarl, some bite to his game. So Sherwood right now, one of the most popular Vancouver Canucks, and yeah, one of the hardest working as well. And then you've got Bluger. 18 games, 1 goal, 6 assists, 7 points. Bluger, hardworking, and I think that while there were some people scratching their heads about why I liked the player so much years ago, I don't think there's anybody scratching their head on that one now. Bluger's been fantastic for Vancouver no matter what they've asked for him. And Pius Suter as well. 18 games, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points. And this is where it's weird. I still like this roster. I still like this team. I still like the core. I still think you've got a good team in Vancouver. It's just a matter of consistency. And I'll get into the pattern we've seen here and how much of that may very well be on the coach. And then you've got Heinen. 18 games, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points. Heinen is better suited to being a third-line forward. And I thought that when he signed with Vancouver, there was a lot of hype about what he could bring maybe to the top 6. And I don't think Heinen ideally is above the third line. With injuries and such, sure, but when everybody's healthy, I think ideally he's on that third line. Tyler Myers, 18 games, 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points. And there are people who hate Myers. Oh, the Canucks should trade Myers. Okay, so Myers takes a significant pay cut to stay with Vancouver over the summer. Myers has been asked to play way more minutes than anybody expected because at points Hughes has been out. Hronek's been out for quite some time. So once Hronek's back up from his conditioning stint and, Hughes really starts to get things going again, then see what Myers is doing and then maybe you'd have a point there. But I used to criticize Myers plenty. I don't now. I feel like he's being asked to do more than the team would have anticipated, more than he would have anticipated. And so he's, I think, making the best of a bad situation, personally. And so we'll see how things trend from here. But I can't. I can't look at this team and go, it's all Myers' fault. It's not. And then there's Sasson, 15 games, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. Endearing himself to fans because solid work ethic. Not a guy who's going to produce a ton of points at the NHL level, but work ethic's important. Then you got Dakota Joshua, 16 games, 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points. He has not got it going this season when he's been in the lineup. Of course, he went through cancer treatment in the offseason. He's now injured again. It's been a rough Murphy's Law type of season for Joshua, so I'm not going to criticize Joshua. Höglander, 16 games, 3 assists. I like Höglander a lot, and we will talk about him again, too, when we get into the career years part of the board. He does make boneheaded decisions here and there. He does take bad penalties here and there, too. One penalty in particular, right near the end of regulation time, and rolls over into the overtime. And he's not doing himself favors right now. But I like Höglander. I hope he fights his way through this and gets his way back into the good graces of Rick Tocchet. But it looks like with every passing game, that's less likely to happen. Then you got Lekkerimaki, 2 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. The idea being that he could be the next one, that Lekkerimaki could be the one to step in if/when Besser moves on. If they do make a big trade at some point, maybe Lekkerimaki ends up being a bigger player. Although I've also seen media asking, would you trade Lekkerimaki at the deadline if you thought you could improve the team? No. Because I don't see this team as a Stanley Cup contender at this point. So I'd rather not see the team part with a young player who's got a good upside for what would essentially probably be a rental at the deadline. I'd rather not. So just throwing that out there. If the Canucks start trading top draft picks like first or second rounders and trading young players to bring in rentals at the deadline, this guy's not going to be happy. Lankinen, 4-4-4 with an .895 save percentage. Lankinen has been very good at points. He's also had struggles at others. So Lankinen is ideally a backup. He's been overplayed by Vancouver because of Demko's injuries. And they don't have the goaltending depth some other organizations have. Like, for instance, Carolina goes out and gets Tokarski and just, there's Tokarski, and they win games with Tokarski. So over that same time period, Demko 2-1-3 with an .881 save percentage. Demko didn't quite look like himself, but I thought there were some encouraging signs the last couple of games he played, and then injury strikes. So, yeah. Their record over this time period is 6-5-7. They've scored 49 goals. They've allowed 58. Their power play's clicking fine at 25%. Their penalty kills at 80%. So 5-on-5 and protecting leads is killing them. And when I say protecting, I mean it's that thing I talked about the other day. And I did see people saying he means the Canucks about just dumping the puck, and just not keeping the puck when you've got a lead. They're one, but they're not the only one. That night, everybody was doing it, and I was like, this is madness. Vancouver needs to be a little more assertive and believe in themselves a little bit more. The other thing that I would say, and if you want to criticize Tocchet, I've felt like at times I've been looking at the TV and thinking, call a timeout. No, you're not going to call a timeout? All right, this is going to keep up. And one thing, if we go back 5 years, when the San Jose Sharks get that 5-minute major power play against Vegas, don't walk away, Vegas fans. Believe me, I'm not criticizing Vegas here. My criticism of Gerard Gallant at the time was that as soon as San Jose started scoring goals on that 5-minute major, Gallant should have called a timeout to try to get his team right, get him right. A timeout can be used to get your team settled, reset the game, take the excitement out of the crowd at least a little bit, and just get everything back to where you need it to be if you want to win the game. And I haven't seen that. And certainly with interviews, Tocchet said all the right things, but it does feel kind of repetitive. There have been coaches the Canucks have had that I feel like I want to hear what he has to say. Vigneault was one that I used to say, I want to hear what Vigneault has to say. Mark Crawford too. And Boudreau was a good interview. Tocchet, I don't get anything from Tocchet interviews other than it sounds similar to what he said last time, which is fine. He doesn't have to tell us absolutely every strategy they're going to employ or necessarily tell us a whole lot, because when he does share things that or maybe things that he shouldn't necessarily have, it's kind of a mess. But in general, it just feels like and maybe it's the Vancouver market. Maybe it's because he knows anything that he says can get really twisted. But yeah, I don't know. It does kind of feel like they fired Boudreau for something similar to this, where it's just the Canucks were meandering. They weren't making any strides. And if you look at the scoring by period over the time period from December 1st until now, they've been outscored in the first period 14-13. That's not bad. In the second period, they've outscored the opposition 20-13. The third period's a problem. They've been outscored 24-15, and in overtime, they've been outscored 7-1. One stat that I saw Thomas Drance posted yesterday is that when Quinn Hughes isn't on the ice in overtime, the Canucks have been outscored 5-0. So that's one of those stats I would use to say this is why Quinn Hughes should be in the conversation for the Hart. Obviously not, for me, the Hart favorite, but should be in the conversation for it, at least from a Vancouver perspective, because it makes a huge difference when he is or isn't on the ice. And then the question mark, too, becomes, so the Canucks end up overplaying Hughes, and do we see him get hurt again? Is this going to be a chronic issue for a team that just desperately relies on Hughes because they don't have the depth behind him? There isn't that depth there, and it's something I talked about all summer. Every meetup, anybody came up to me, hey, what do you think about the Canucks? I'd be like, they need more blue line depth, I think. I'm not sold on the blue line depth. That's why I was so happy when they picked up Brandstrom, because it was like, all right, so he's at least should be NHL level. Over this time period, he's only played 9 games. He's had a couple of points. He's looked good at stages, not fantastic at others, but I mean, he's not going to be out there as a UFA if he's a perfect defenseman. And then you get into the fact that a few of these guys may have had career years. So first, Hoglander last year, 80 games, 24 goals, 12 assists, 36 points. He's not hitting those totals this year. And he's not driving the play like he did last year. Now, whether that's something on him or if it's something on Rick Tocchet for the deployment of the players, you guys can decide. Joshua, 63 games, 18 goals, 14 assists, 32 points. I am giving Joshua a pass because he did go through cancer treatments in the offseason. Took him a while to make his debut. I am not going to come down on him. I'm just saying that the totals he put up last year, he's not going to trend in that direction this year. And it may very well be that he had a career year last year where everything just kind of went his way. And then there's Demko, 35-14-2 last season with a .918 save percentage. In the Vezina conversation, played fantastic for the Canucks, especially in the first half of last season. And so maybe with the knee injury and now, back spasms, maybe we're watching as Demko, I don't want to say breaks down, but maybe we won't see Demko get back to those kinds of numbers again. Maybe he'll be a goaltender who can play you 50 games in a season and no more than that, because he does tend to get injured, which would mean that, keeping Lankinen around would be good, but you got to watch the cost for Lankinen too, because he's 29. He's generally been a backup at the NHL level. I think Lankinen's a very good backup. I don't think he's a starter personally, but you guys can let me know your thoughts. Now, the exits from this team, not a lot of these players have had, I think, any negative consequence in leaving. Mikheyev, him going to Chicago, I think was a godsend for Mikheyev. Mikheyev has been good in Chicago. Not great production, certainly, but I think he's been productive, and he doesn't have any pressure in Chicago either. Lafferty, bottom 6 forward. I don't think they're missing Lafferty. I think Sassen's doing at least what Lafferty would do last year. Zadorov was acquired from Calgary because they knew they needed help on the blue line. So when Zadorov leaves, they know they still need help on the blue line, right? And then you got Lindholm. Elias Lindholm did not have a great regular season with Vancouver, but he had a great playoff. And that great playoff got him a pretty pricey contract from the Boston Bruins, which he hasn't really measured up to, but the Bruins are a whole other mess right now. So it's interesting because Vancouver's got some players from Boston, Boston got some players from Vancouver, and it just hasn't worked. So maybe that's what you do. Maybe you trade Lindholm and Zadorov to the Canucks in exchange for, cap-wise, that wouldn't work. Ian Cole has been decent in Utah, depth defenseman and all of that, and that's it. It's veteran depth that the Vancouver Canucks lost when Cole left. Podkolzin, bottom six forward, didn't play a ton for Vancouver last season, and I'm glad he's doing well in Edmonton. He may never be that really productive forward that he was expected to be when he was drafted, but I like Podkolzin. And then you got DeSmith. DeSmith leaves, but Lankinen comes in. I think that's a lateral move. DeSmith's been very good in Dallas this year, and that's why I'm saying don't overpay Lankinen, because if you're doing a good job as professional scouts, you know which goaltenders are playing well, and there are usually at least a couple of goalies who could excel on another team or with an expanded role. So I don't think losing DeSmith and picking up Lankinen has been a drop off, and I just think this team needs some more depth and confidence. Confidence is a huge issue. As soon as the puck goes in their net, the body language changes, and it's like, oh, not again. And it is, maybe it's because I've spent over 40 years watching the Canucks primarily. It feels like I've watched this before. It feels like we've been here before as Canuck fans watching this team, as the confidence isn't necessarily there. They don't hold the leads. Last year, at this time, the team was 26-11-3, 55 points. This year, 18-12-10 for 46 points. And that 10 really does stand out. Now, the rest of last season, they went 24-12-6. So if this team can go 24-12-6 from here, they're a playoff team. But I don't know that there's a lot of people that would bet on them to go 24-12-6 from here, which would leave them 42-24-16. That's still ugly. Once you reach double digits in that third column, it's kind of an ugly record. Because the question becomes, okay, so they've won 18 out of 40, so how can you say they're 6 games above 500? And that's why I use the term NHL 500. So I don't know how this gets fixed, and I didn't put their upcoming schedule for a simple reason. When I do the upcoming schedule in some of these videos, it's because I want to look at the strength of the upcoming schedule. The strength of the upcoming schedule doesn't matter to Vancouver. They have found ways to lose to teams below the playoff line. They have found ways to beat teams above the playoff line, telling me that this is not a team that necessarily has a problem with strength of schedule. This is a team that I think a lot of the problem is psychological. And I don't know if a rift on the team, if that exists, is part of it. I don't think so. I don't think that when a team's leading 4-1 in the third period that they start squabbling on the bench about who hates who, and so they forget to play and they end up losing that game in overtime. But if they could start winning these games, we can stop talking about all that other stuff because it'll go away. It always does. Winning cures all ills between players on teams in the National Hockey League. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the job Rick Tocchet's done? Because honestly, there have been times over the last few weeks where I've thought, they got rid of Bruce Boudreau, and I understood at the time that the Canucks weren't playing all that well, but they're not playing all that well right now either. I just feel like Tocchet's probably tighter with Alvin and Rutherford than Boudreau was, so he'll probably get more slack before they decide to make a change. But let me know your thoughts on what you would change with the Canucks, and keeping in mind that they don't really have cap space either to make any additions, so it does get a little tricky because they need to fix the blue line. To me, it's the blue line. I'll use the football analogy. There are games where a team might have the lead in the fourth quarter, but you can tell the other team, the team with the lead, that their defense is weakening. And so you just keep running at it. You wear down that defensive line, and eventually You're suddenly getting a couple of touchdowns. Some routes might open up that weren't open earlier in the game because you've just wore them down. And it feels like with the Canucks, it just over time, they just don't have either they don't have the energy or they don't have the confidence at the end of the game to win it. And the opposing teams know it. Teams do not show any fear of the Canucks. They don't show any concern for the they attack, and late in the game, I think they understand this team's fighting with their confidence. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.